Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the English NCR Bootcamp. Before we begin, let's do a quick mic test. So since you're wishing me good morning, I think you can all hear me, right? And you can also see the screen, which is on display in front of you. So we will all be working towards understanding basics of English NCR that you need for CLAT and even for other exams, which is pretty much the same. So these 2 days, we will focus on certain things that you must know when you embark on a study plan for aptitude tests with respect to English and reasoning. What we believe happens when you are preparing for these exams is that you are sometimes unaware of the basics that are tested when English or CR is asked in these exams. So today we will just focus on what those basics of or the building blocks of reasoning are, at least in the first part, which is my session. And then towards the latter half, for about 45 minutes, you will spend time on basics of vocabulary building. I will probably take about 90 minutes or something with the critical thinking part. And next 45 minutes, you will spend on vocabulary. So the end timing as such, we did not decide. We were looking at figuring out, how much you are keen on doing these sessions. And this is the first time that we are doing such a boot camp. So, wherein we are doing a subject matter study rather than just a basic webinar on entrance tests, which of course many of you, or rather most of you, must have attended. Day 2, you will be going through basics of grammar skills and reading comprehension. Again, the split would be somewhere about 90 minutes plus 45 minutes. So I hope you are ready to spend this kind of time in understanding these two sections. Right? I am quite excited about doing this session. I hope you are too. And of course, as and when you start your studies for this entrance test, this will be the bedrock, this will be the building block upon which you will move on and study all the basics of or topics or fundamentals of the various chapters that are there in these headings, right? So do, of course, write us a feedback after the session on whether you understood what we were trying to tell you or not, right? And whenever you get time, do, of course, log into clatpossible.com, give us a Google review, and we will be very happy with your feedback and reviews. Now, let's begin with critical thinking. What is this critical thinking, which is a building block of critical reasoning? What is this critical thinking, which is not just a building block of critical reasoning, but also a building block of reading comprehension, legal reasoning, and any other form of entrance test which uses the word reasoning? So what do you mean by critical thinking? What do you mean by reasoning that you are asked in these exams? Now, critical thinking in the most basic language means reaching a conclusion or solution using reasons, objective reasons. How do you do that? Whenever you are reading, whenever you are solving a problem, this is done by finding links between ideas. So let's say that you are reading a newspaper article just now, and you are trying to understand what the author is telling you. So how would you do that? You form a link between the first paragraph and the second paragraph. Most of these times in reading, these links are given. Your job is to identify these links and ask yourself, how has the author connected the first and the second paragraphs? Where is the author leading this article? What other keywords or links can I find to understand whether the author is giving me a good review or a bad review, whether the author is simply describing something to me, or is the author trying to tell me something else? How do I reach, or how do I know what the author is asking me to understand? So finding links between ideas which could be written or a problem which is stated to you for which you have to give a solution, using those links then to reach a conclusion is called critical thinking. If you do not, or if you are not conscious of locating these links, then maybe you will miss out on the key idea. You may have some basic understanding of what has been written, but the key idea, the most important thing, that will be missed. So understanding of all these links, understanding of what the author is trying to tell you, and being conscious all the time while reading. Okay, so the author has said this in this paragraph, and then the author has moved to this paragraph. Okay, here the author is talking about this. Now, how do I link A with B? So maybe the author began by some form of criticism. And then in the second paragraph, the author gave a basic history. Okay, so why has the author given me history after criticism? Maybe you don't understand. So you move to the next paragraph. Okay, now here the author is comparing. That means the author gave me the history to help me understand the third paragraph, where the author was comparing the two things, historically and what is happening today. So this is called link formation. There is always a purpose behind anything which is written. So as you read those blocks, you form those links and you keep getting a clearer idea. So why did the author give the history? Because the author wanted me to understand the comparison, which is in the following paragraph. And you will be surprised to know, not just this comes in as a form of understanding, but you are asked questions also on structure. You are asked, how has the author structured the thoughts? That means understanding of these links is extremely important. Then, critical thinking also means letting go of biases. What is a bias? Can someone tell me what a bias is? Biases. Yes, prejudice, very good. Preconceived thoughts, very good. Taking one side, discrimination, partiality, very good. Unreasonable belief, favoritism, okay. So you all understand a bias, right? A bias could lead to hypocrisy. Maybe a bias is not hypocrisy. So bias or prejudice means a preconceived thought. So how do we get these biases? How are we biased? Are we taught bias? Propaganda, experience, okay. Conditioning, not conditionals, yes, conditioning, very good. So these biases are basically stereotypes through society, very good. Conditioning, structural propaganda. All right, we have our own ideologies, all right. So these biases are basically, yes, they come from conditioning. If you grow up in a family and there you have certain rituals, routines, you follow certain routine, you follow a certain thought process, you are taught a certain religion. So over a period of time, because you follow a certain lifestyle, you come to think of your lifestyle as being the only lifestyle. But when you go to college, you meet your roommate who is very different from you, right? So bias can be not just a very high flying propaganda or a favoritism thing. It can also be a simple thing such as this, and you just cannot adjust with your roommate because you think her habits are atrocious, her habits are awful. But you do not try to understand that just because she is different from you, you both have a right to exist in a way that you think is right. Would you agree? I'm not sure how many of you have stayed in hostels or boarding schools. How many of you have stayed in hostels or boarding schools? Great. So I'm sure many of you must have gone through this experience. But now, as you start looking at other people, you live with other people, people other than your family, don't you think you have become more broad-minded? You adjust better. So your biases get reduced as you get introduced to newer people, newer ways of living, newer thought processes, right? But people who do not move out, they are in a closed community or in a very close-knit family, they have more biases because, not because they want to be biased, but because they don't know anything else. So biases can result from this, or biases can result from conditioning. If every time you are asked to pray and in praying you are always told your God is the only God, other gods do not exist. So it could be that, it could be habit, it could be a belief. That belief could be propagated by family members, it could be propagated by your community or by your government. So do you think a bias, a belief will help you in critical reasoning? That means beliefs are antithetical to reasoning. What did I just say? Let me write it for all of you. Belief is antithetical. This is a logical word. Okay, so antithetical, let me to reasoning. Beliefs are antithetical to reasoning. What is the meaning of this line? Very good. They are opposed, incompatible, right? Opposite of reasoning. So why would beliefs and biases be antithetical to reasoning? They would be antithetical to reasoning because they close your mind. You are not open to listening to others. You just think what you believe in is good and it's the only thing. Right? So when we approach critical thinking or critical reasoning, when we are reading new articles, when we are reading new opinions, when we get to understand different methods of reasoning, we have to work with an open mind. We have to work with an open mind. That does not mean you cannot have a set of beliefs, but you should not confuse your beliefs or your religion with spirituality. Critical thinking does not say that you should not believe in God or you should not be spiritual. It respects your belief in a higher power. But what it is opposed to is closing your mind and not being open to ideas. So that is what we have to understand as a key difference. Nurturing biases. We all know we are from different religions, but we all know that each religion does not ask you to be intolerant. Every religion, every scripture talks about tolerance. Yet, we see so many religious wars, countries torn apart. Look what is happening at Gaza. Are you reading newspapers? Do you see the whole of the Gaza Strip burning? It's a centuries-old religious war. My land, my religion, your religion. Yet, every religious scripture talks about logic, talks about tolerance, isn't it? So what I just said was that critical thinking does not say you should not be spiritual, you should not have belief in a higher power. Reasoning understands that we live in a society, we have our rituals, but what reasoning tells us is to be of an open mind and be open to the fact that there are other such societies and they have their rituals. And therefore, reasoning allows our mind to grow, to look for a better method of living, a better method of understanding. And reasoning tells us to not stop growing, to not think that what we have just done, what we are just doing is the best possible thing. So if you approach reasoning with a closed mind, if you read only from the perspective of what you know, then A, you will not be able to answer questions in reasoning, and B, you will not be open to understanding the key concepts of reasoning, right? So if we have an open mind, we understand the biggest flaw in reasoning, which is assumptions and biases. It is actually a standard question of reasoning. Assumptions, preconceived notions, biases, writing something or thinking something by having a set belief. So if I have a set belief, for example, let's say some people from our grandparents' age or our parents' age, if they have a set belief that women who dress in a certain way attract catcalling or attract molestation, right? So will they ever be open to the idea that eve teasing or molestation is not a woman's fault? Because they are starting from this belief that a woman was dressed provocatively, that a woman was dressed a certain way. So do you know how many centuries it has taken for us to challenge this belief? But we have been successful in challenging it, at least for our generation, for your generation, which is again the generation after mine. Isn't it? That means we challenged the bias first and then built an argument. So critical thinking has to start by attacking these biases. Critical thinking has to start by attacking these assumptions. So how were we able to attack these biases? By showing a counter fact that certain women who were dressed from head to toe were also eve teased and molested. And by showing even more horror examples of young infants, toddlers who faced abuse, who were women. So how does one attack a bias? If you just say, no, you are biased, nobody believes. So what did we do? Or rather, what was done? I mean, we didn't do anything. It was such a shocking thing that in many cases, we were able to show the opposite of what those people thought and present what is known as, let me write it for you, and present what is known as evidence. Do you all understand evidence? It was very sad, but there was so much evidence available to show that there are countless number of women who were traditionally dressed, who were dressed according to what these people thought should be dressing. And they were also on the receiving end of abuse. And also further shocking evidence to show of young girls or toddlers and even infants. So tell me one thing, when evidence is produced to disprove a bias, what is that called? It is called attacking the underlying assumption. So when evidence is used to disprove a bias, or attacking a fixed notion or a belief, what is it called? What did I just write? Can you write it down in the chat box? This evidence is called attacking the underlying assumption. What is therefore an underlying assumption? An underlying assumption is a belief which is not stated all the time. So every time a person blames a woman, that person does not say, you see, I think that women should dress properly. Do they mention it every time? No. They don't mention it every time. But we all know that they are thinking about it. Would you agree? They don't mention it every time, but we all know this is what they are thinking. So assumptions, therefore, are unstated beliefs or an unstated thought process or an unstated bias from which someone's thought process emerges. Sometimes we are aware that the person is thinking like this. Other times we are not aware. So we are aware of this bias because it is prevalent in our society and in most societies, even Western societies, who believe that, certain women should be molested, or, most societies, because what is common to all societies, patriarchy. But there are certain biases, for example, preference for a male child. Right? Have you heard of that bias in your society? It's still there, shockingly. But most Western societies do not have this bias, at least they anymore. It was prevalent in the Victorian ages in England, where they believe that, there has to be, you have to sire a male heir. So that, so if female infanticide, maybe some European societies or some newer Western societies don't understand it. Right? So all of this means that whatever happens in a society has an impact on reasoning. Sometimes reasoning tries to make a better society, and most of the time within reasoning, traditions, cultures, all of these things have to play a role. That means reasoning is not an isolated theory. That means reasoning is not an isolated theory. Right? Now, when we use this reasoning for exams, what we basically try to do is we teach you the various rules. For example, today we understood assumptions. There is, of course, going to be a bigger lecture on assumptions, mostly from an exam point of view, how to identify assumptions, what about assumptions that we are not aware of. But you all know today that assumptions are not just a theory, they are actually coming from something that we see every day. Right? So today we, for example, understood the origin of assumptions, which was biases, stereotypes. Then when we study assumptions as a theory, at least you will not think that assumption is something which is only done in CR class. It is something that you live every day with. Then for exams, we will also try to work on working theories like how to link the author's conclusion to the evidence, isn't it? We also learned a new word today, evidence, counter evidence, attacking an assumption. So when we study CR in classes, we will learn how to link conclusions to evidence, how to challenge the assumption, how to counter the assumption, right? And slowly we will move on to different types of questions in critical reasoning and how to answer them. So I've come out with a small sample of questions that you get in exams and what are the underlying thought processes with those questions. So let's try and solve this question together. I will give you 2 minutes to read it and then put your answer in the chat box. Can you all read the question? Great. So let's solve it. Kamna, please check your output device because others are able to hear me. So what do you see in the options is different lines that I have taken up from the passage, right? So what is this question asking you to do? This question is asking you to break down the argument. What is this question asking you to do? This question is asking you to break down the argument and identify the conclusion. So what have we done? In different options, we have broken it down. Option A has the first line, option B has the second line, and option C has the third line. So you will be surprised to know that what you are just doing right now and answering is nothing but a question from our first session in critical reasoning, which we will be doing when you study with us. And this is called analyzing an argument by breaking it down. So when I read this argument, I read that the first part talks about oral history. What is the biggest problem? It is disseminated through memory and is based largely on what has retained or understood. Do you understand this part? For example, your grandmother telling you some tales about partition. For my grandmother was a part. My grandparents were a part of the partition of India and Pakistan. So a lot of my history of partition comes from stories that they told me. Now, if I share the same stories with my children, maybe it is based on what I heard from her and what I understood, isn't it? I may have forgotten a detail, changed a detail here and there. That means now what I told my children, which is oral history, could be changed because I'm telling them. And then when they tell their children, they might change a few things here and there as well. So this is what is the first line saying. So what is this called? It's called perspective. My understanding of what my grandmother told me is my perspective. My kids' understanding of what I tell them is their perspective. So this is the first line. Second line says perspective is based on interpretation and cognizance. Cognizance means understanding. Therefore, to say that oral history is prejudicial will not be an incorrect assessment of it. So what is the conclusion here? It's not very difficult to identify the conclusion because the conclusion is mostly stated by certain keywords called conclusion indicators. Can you tell me if there is a conclusion indicator present here? Excellent. So anyone who reads an argument and sees therefore will know that no matter what any other sentence is saying, the conclusion will be written after therefore. Would you agree? So this conclusion says that oral history is prejudicial is correct. It is based on two parts. One, the first sentence. This first sentence talks about a problem with oral history, and the second on the definition of perspective. So both of these have been used as supporting statements for this conclusion, correct? These supporting statements, which are used to draw a conclusion, are called premises. So what are they called? Let's write it down. These supporting statements that are used to draw a conclusion are called premises. Can you write down the word for supporting statements that I have written here? So has everyone understood this question? Any problem? Great. Now let's do the second question. What do you have to do? You have to compare these three sentences with the previous argument and tell me if these three sentences are similar to the way the previous argument was written. If yes, then say yes. If no, then tell me what is the difference between these three separate statements and the argument that we spoke about. You can take 2 minutes to write your answers in the Take 2 minutes to write your answer in the chat box. All right, these statements are not linked, unlike the what else? Of course, these three statements are not linked. They are individual statements. No premises are given, correct? So what can you tell me about the first statement? Okay. Tashu Singh, yes, that's correct. So is the first statement a question or is it asking a question? Yes, Trushil Vyas, you're correct. It could be a rhetorical question. Okay, Grena, that's fine. That's a good assessment. So the first statement could be a rhetorical question. Any question, whether rhetorical or genuine question, these are not arguments, right? So a question, any interrogative statement, these are not arguments. A rhetorical question is just a rhetorical statement. At max, you can say that it is an opinion, but it is not an argument because there is no premises in it. Right? Second one is also a rhetorical question followed by something which supports it. But remember that rhetorical questions do not make an argument. A rhetorical question could come at the end of an argument and be used as a conclusion. So second one could be said to be a conclusion followed by a sentence supporting it. But rhetorical questions do not make good arguments. Only question is never an argument. But sometimes rhetorical questions can feature at the end of an argument where the author has written the whole thought process. Then that rhetorical question basically does the job of a conclusion. So before we do this further, for the benefit of everyone, can you tell me what is rhetorical? All right, a question that does not need an answer. Why doesn't it need an answer? Why doesn't it need an answer? Anyone? Because the author answers it himself or herself, isn't it? So why do rhetorical questions do not need an answer? Because that question itself is the answer, but it is asked in a question-like manner to put pressure on the reader, right? Whenever you say something in a question format, for example, the first one, would you live in fear or would you die with your head held high? Naturally, when you put the pressure on the reader, and before that you have convinced the reader to live with dignity, will the reader choose the option of fear? Let's take example for some advertisements. There are many advertisements that ask a question. You must have seen them. क्या आपकी टूथपेस्ट में नमक है? So is that a question? Do you answer them? Do you call up the company and say, नहीं नमक नहीं है, टूथपेस्ट में तो बिल्कुल नहीं है, खाने में भी आजकल नहीं है? Right? So what is that ad trying to tell you? So is it asking you something or is it telling you something? How do you understand a real question from a rhetorical question? A real question tells you something, asks you something, and your answer is important for it. But a rhetorical question tells you something. Your answer is not important for it. Right? So rhetoric is someone wrote it correctly. Let me go back and see who wrote it. Amrut, yes. So rhetoric is a dramatic way of putting across your opinion. So what is rhetoric? Rhetoric is a dramatic way of putting across your opinion. Do you understand it? It is a dramatic way. Where do you use it, therefore? We use it in ads, political speeches. I'm sure you understand rhetoric in political speeches. Isn't it? So what is the purpose of a rhetoric? A purpose of a rhetoric is not to give you information or give you logical arguments, but a purpose of a rhetoric is to convince you. That means the foundation of rhetoric is only very flawed. A speech given by a politician, we all know very well, is not genuine. Haven't we lived with it for years, understanding that yes, this speech is not genuine, it's only for effect? But there are certain speeches given by serious statespersons, given by serious prime ministers and presidents, where they are genuinely discussing an agenda, genuinely doing groundwork. Unfortunately, they don't live in our country, they live in other countries, right? So we don't know, but yes, there are certain genuine speeches and stuff where they talk about proper agenda and what things are being done. We don't know them. So we only know rhetorical speeches where there is huge drama. There are rhetorical questions that are asked. The greatest rhetor, a person who writes or speaks in a rhetorical manner, is called a rhetor. What is that person called? A rhetor. So do you know of any great rhetor? Yes, I'm getting some answers in the chat box. Right? Aristotle was a logician. Rhetors are people who don't mean anything. Dhruv Rathi, okay. Oh my God. So this chat box is becoming extremely anti-national. So let's not... Socrates was basically a thinker. Martin Luther King had great arguments in his speech. So his speeches were emphatic because there was a purpose. Trump, please, Trump is neither a rhetor, he doesn't know how to talk, he doesn't have a vocabulary, so forget it. Plato and Socrates were thinkers. Yes, Brutus gave a very, very satirical speech. Brutus's speech was satirical, right? Greta Thunberg is not a rhetor. All right. Yes, so I'm able to see most of your answers. Yes, Hitler, of course. Right. Yes, so most politicians did have rhetorical speeches. Sometimes only rhetoric is there in a speech. Sometimes there is rhetoric plus argument, right? So we can differentiate on that. Kangana Ranaut, that's too much. That's giving her a lot of respect. Okay. All right, great. So do you think rhetoric is good for an argument? Yes, because it leaves an impact. Do you think only rhetoric is a good argument? We just decided that only rhetoric is not a good argument because there is no argument in it. Right? So yes, while you have Obama and Martin Luther King and stuff, you have Brutus, you have Shakespeare, who wrote a lot of rhetoric in the speeches. So you have to see, as a logician, as a critical thinker, as the future of this country, what do you have to understand? Is this only rhetoric? Or is this rhetoric plus some substance? Right? Rhetoric plus some substance. As educated people, we want, but sometimes masses only want rhetoric because it's entertaining. It helps you reach the audience. There is a lot of emotion, drama in a rhetoric. Right? So when the whole country understands only rhetoric from substance plus rhetoric, then of course the country will progress. So that means if you see only rhetoric, you can't do anything with it because there is no argument to defeat. There is only drama. Right? That is why. So sometimes when they say Bharat hamari mata hai, aapne Bharat Mata ke against aise kya keh diya? Can you defeat this speech? अब naturally Bharat ko mata bana diya hai. Now anything you say will be against Bharat Mata and against a mother. Can anyone in India say anything against a mother? So in rhetoric, what happens is most of the time you draw unfair analogy. Unfair analogy. Analogy means comparison. Right? It's okay to designate your country as your motherland, but every time just keep saying Bharat hamari mata hai, aapne Bharat ke against bol diya hai. So can you ever answer that question? Can you ever say anything after that? Because whatever you say after that will be misunderstood. Right? So you will try to explain, no, I'm not talking anything against the mother. I'm just saying this is wrong with our country. Now, every time you say something is wrong with your country and you are told, oh my God, you abused your mother. Can you ever win this argument? You're not abusing your mother. You're just telling the people what is wrong. This is what a good rhetor does. This is what a good speaker does. They kill you in the very bud because they know you will falter here. And as a result, they are able to generate emotion and get away with it. Have you all understood rhetoric, everyone? Very, very important from understanding critical reasoning. Will you be able to differentiate between substance and rhetoric now? What about the last statement? Sorry. What about the last statement? Come here when I ask you to do so. What is this? It's a command, it's an order. Command, order, even request. Are they arguments? No, they are not arguments. They are direct statements. Right? Yes, imperative, assertive statements, requests, So they are not arguments, right, everyone? So that means argument has to be a set of statements which has a conclusion and supporting detail. That supporting detail is called a premise. So we spoke about an assumption just a while ago. Can you quickly give me the assumption behind this argument? So an argument contains a conclusion and supporting statements. Those supporting statements are called premises. Give me the assumption in this argument. Assumption means something which the author should have mentioned but has not mentioned. Very good, Ishita. Trushil, that's correct. No, Soumya, think again. I've got some good answers. Ravi, that's very good. Dhwani, correct. Srishti, correct. Arushi Arora, correct. Aman Shivastav, correct. Assumption is unstated. Soumya Tripathi, correct. Underlying belief. No, Mehak, you are over assuming. Ashmit Thakur, correct. Astha Gupta, correct. Ayansh, I'm not sure whether you'll get a recording. Yes, Romit Roy, correct. So I've got all these correct answers from all of you. Very good. All right. So what are the premises here? There are 40 places of religious significance to Hindus in India and around 966 million Hindus. This is a fact. What is a fact? A fact is a statement which is true as per the correct scenario, right? So if we follow temple visit timings and average visits a day to incorporate social distancing compulsorily, it will take 24,000 days or 66 years for them to visit each religious place. That means, based on the facts given and additional fact of social distancing, the author comes to the conclusion that all Hindus will take 66 years for 966 million Hindus to reach every place of pilgrimage. So what is the author assuming? What is the underlying assumption here? The underlying assumption over here is A, all the 966 million Hindus are religious. Maybe they are not, there is no atheist there. And all of them will visit all the 40 places or want to visit all the 40 places. Is that not an assumption by the author? So what is the author assuming? The author is saying, not saying that those Hindus who worship or who are religious, who visit pilgrimage sites, the author is assuming all Hindus are religious. They are all visiting pilgrimage sites, isn't it? So that means all 966 million Hindus want to go to all these 40 places. Have you understood this assumption made by the author? Because the calculation of the author is based on all 966 million Hindus. So this is called assumption. Assumption means something that the author believes to be true but is not written in the argument. The argument is only telling us how many Hindus there are in India and how many religious places there are in India. Based on this information, the author has incorporated social distancing norms in temples, and the author says that for all of these 966 million Hindus to be able to visit the 40 places, it will take 66 years. What is the author assuming? That all 966 want to go to these 40 places? Right? Kalyanmai Sahu, have you understood this? Okay, let's read this argument. Quickly tell me, is this argument valid? Okay, Asta is giving me a very technical answer, hasty generalization. That's correct. Do you all understand that there is something wrong with this argument? Right? What is wrong with this argument? Very good. The author is taking 3 separate and isolated incidents and joining them. That's correct. That is what is wrong with this argument. The author has taken one incident of a colony dog bite and 2 more incidents that the author read about in newspapers. And we don't even know whether these 2 incidents happened 6 months ago, 2 years ago. So based on just 3 isolated events, probably even isolated by distance and isolated by time, plus maybe the dogs were old. Sometimes old dogs become, rabid and, they lose their sense. So with improper data, the author is urging the authorities to ban Dobermans as dogs, and not just like all Dobermans as dogs. Right? And we don't even know why the Dobermans were biting. So it's an extreme conclusion. Do you all understand? This is flawed reasoning. Were you all able to see the flaw here? So this type of flaw is called a hasty generalization. That means without any proper data, based on just 1 or 2 cases, you draw a conclusion on the entire species. You draw the conclusion on the entire species. Right? Okay. Hasty generalization, based on just 1 or 2 cases, you draw a conclusion on the entire species. Janvi, that is what I said. Yes. Can you read this? What is the method of reasoning used by the author here? Yes. Ishita, I've got your answer. So you have to begin with, understand whether the given argument can be said to be valid or logical. So what is the argument doing? The argument is basically attacking a person's identity rather than a person's argument. So whenever we find a flaw based on identity, so Raila Shahid is invited to talk about Sabrimala temple issue. So instead of saying that, Raila Shahid doesn't know much about the background, or maybe her arguments are flawed, to blame her religious identity. Maybe her religious identity does not fit with the debate, but she made logical points. Is that possible? Yes, sometimes it is not possible because that person does not understand the other religion. But should we say that her arguments show she does not understand the religion? Or should we say that because she is Muslim, she won't understand the religion? So what does logic tell us? Logic tells us to always criticize or debate the argument of the person and not criticize the person. Do you understand the difference between these two things? Whenever we attack the person or the person's identity or the person's background, then it is poor logic, poor reasoning. It is called ad hominem. It's a Latin term. Let me write it for all of you, everyone. Ad hominem. That means lashing out, criticizing the person or some form of the identity of the person. Is that correct, everyone? Do you understand it? Another form of ad hominem is also called, 1 minute, tu quoque. Sorry. Tu quoque. Tu quoque means look who's talking. What does it translate into? Look who's talking. Tu quoque is basically sometimes used as a criticism to showcase hypocrisy. For example, Trump talking about women empowerment. Would you not say tu quoque then? Right? Would you not say tu quoque then? So that is the problem. Yes, it's akin to irony. Tu quoque means look who is talking. Look who is talking. Right? Not contrary, look who's talking. But yes, it somehow showcases irony. Okay, what about this argument? No, not hasty generalization. Read again. No. People that lie are victims because I lie and I am a victim. This is called circular reasoning. Do you notice that the supporting detail is also the conclusion? Do you notice that the premise and the conclusion are the same? Why are people who lie victims? Because I lie and I am a victim. So has the author given any genuine support for this? Or has the author just repeated the conclusion in the support? This form of reasoning where one reason and the conclusion are the same is called circular reasoning. This form of reasoning where conclusion and reason are the same is called circular reasoning. Right? Have you got it? Circular reasoning? So both sides of the argument are saying the same thing. Can you see that? Both sides of the argument are saying the same thing. Right? Trump, someone said, was a great rhetor. If you listen to Trump's speeches, they are all filled with circular reasoning. I'm the president, you should listen to me because you have to listen to the president. Something like that. Right? No, Meg, that's not correct. Circular reasoning mostly talks about, is mostly a form of logic where you have no clear evidence, but you just use the evidence as conclusion and conclusion as evidence. Right? All right, this is our second last question. What can you say about this argument? Take your time, read it. Yes, Krishna, that's correct. Lack of evidence. Yes, Trushil, lack of evidence. So what type of problem is with this argument? This argument is looking at 1, 2. Can you see it? These are some data that the argument is picking. And the majority data, the argument is ignoring. Can you see it? The argument is picking the problem data, but ignoring the majority data. This is called cherry picking. Cherry picking says that there is a body of evidence saying that lots of work is going on, but you are choosing to only pick the exceptions because it is suiting your argument. You want to say that it's all gone, nothing is happening. You are choosing to ignore majority data which is available. You are only picking at data which is suiting you and ignoring majority data. Right? Have you understood this? Yes, they are all forms of biases. So this is called cherry picking. Cherry picking, what is cherry picking? Ignoring majority data, only picking up exceptions to prove your point because those exceptions are favorable to your argument. Got it? Don't we all do it sometimes? Everything is going well, but you see one mistake and then you just focus on that. Hogwash means fooling someone. Right? Have you experienced this cherry picking? Sometimes parents also do it, I think. You study the whole day, they won't see that, but the 15 minutes that you are on your phone, they will see that. Has it happened with you? And then they will criticize you for not studying. Okay, so now you have a term for them. Isn't it nice to know critical reasoning? Then you can all give voice to your logical arguments and show what. So there's another very it's a fun fact for parents in critical reasoning. That's called they go down the slippery slope. So let me give you an example of going down the slippery slope. Let's say that you went ahead and colored your hair and you show it to your mother, right? And then, of course, I think she is shocked. You colored your hair. Next, you will tattoo yourself, and then you will have body piercings. Then you will run away with a hippie. Have you experienced this? Or maybe it's only the 90s parents who did it. My parents did it a lot. So today you'll color your hair. You're already wearing torn jeans. Next, you will tattoo your body, and then you will have body piercings, and then you will run away with an Israeli. So this is called going down the slippery slope. Of course, how can I forget drug addict? And die in a jail in Mexico. Yes, you guys are good. You guys are very good. So I'm also a parent. I think I see myself doing everything again, what my parents did. And, I also do a lot of cherry picking. And I haven't started slippery slope. My children are very, very young right now. Right? But I think I will start that very soon. Okay, last question. And then we will send you for vocabulary. Yes, Kalyan Mai, I'm going to do it. I'm an Indian parent. How can I be an Indian parent without doing these gaps in reasoning? Yes. So this is the last part, and the last question will not be giving you many answers, but it will open to you a sea of options. This is called causal reasoning. Let me write it for you. So causal logic, it is a chapter which takes about 3 classes. And in this, the author connects 2 things in a cause effect. So there are 2 things, 1 cholesterol, 2 obesity. Now the author links the 2 in the conclusion, saying one leads to the other. So there are 2 things happening together in most patients, obesity and cholesterol. Without any further proof, the author makes one the cause and the second the effect. So this type of flaw is called causal correlation flaw. Yes, it is the same as correlation. Correlation, causation, flaw. So it's a big topic. We will be doing that separately. Causation, correlation, flaw, interchanging of cause effect, right? But to begin with, just recognize that when the author connects 2 correlated events in a cause effect relationship, that is called causation correlation flaw. Maybe this is correct, maybe it is not, but the author has not given us enough reason to look at it either way, right? So this was basics of logic for all of you. As you can see, your vocabulary session is on next and Shruti ma'am is waiting, right? So before that, just remember the salient features of the session today: linking of the author's conclusion with the supporting details, analyzing the supporting details or premises. Are they logical? Is there a bias? Is there any flaw? We have done some very, very common flaws today. Remember that no argument is perfect, but our job is to find out the logic used by the author and challenge it if necessary. Right? So we begin by identifying the conclusion, relating it with the supporting details, finding the links, checking for flaws in the links. No argument is perfect. Sometimes you are asked to challenge it, sometimes not. Many times you are asked to analyze it. So that is what we learned to do today. All right. All those who are interested in our courses, please note down the following numbers. You can call us anytime for further inquiry into our courses. Please note down these numbers. And you can mail me or surbhi@clatpossible.com. Yes, it's a general course for 21, 22, and 23. Or reach me on any of these handles. Thank you so much. Now, since ma'am is waiting, I will